Crime Curious is a true crime podcast that takes an in-depth look into real cases through the lens of a trained investigator and former prosecutor turned judge.
If you are sensitive to expletives, anatomical descriptions, and accurate descriptions of crime scenes, this podcast may not be suitable for you.
Are you in need of a private investigator with decades of experience? Crime Curious has teamed up with Corbett Investigations, a top private investigation practice in the greater Indiana area and beyond. Corbett Investigations is run by a former homicide commander of one of the country's most successful homicide units and has put over 400 people in prison for homicide, handled over 1,100 death investigations, and solved 33 cold case murders. Tim Corbett has a whole team behind his services that help him to be successful. They specialize in services like bloodstain analysis, ballistic crime scene reconstruction, and forensic pathology, just to name a few. When you contact Corbett Investigations, you talk with Tim Corbett directly. He is hands-on with every case and can travel anywhere that is needed to get the job done. Corbett Investigations prides itself on honesty, truth, and feet-to-the-ground investigation work, and the strength to stand up to whatever is in the way of solving the crime. Corbett Investigations specializes in complex homicide cases, sex offenses, and criminal investigations, old or new. Tim and his team have a reputation for finding witnesses and information that others could not. Contact Corbett Investigations for a free consultation today at 574-229-8115. That's 574-229-8115. You can also check them out on Facebook at Corbett Investigation Services, Inc. Now, on to the show. Welcome to Crime Curious. I'm Charnell.
I'm Megan.
Still Jason.
Hey, Jason's still
Yay,
here.
hold on.
We didn't scare him away.
I didn't shake anything.
Shake all the gree-gree.
God damn it.
Would you like to pet the dormouse?
Takes two hands.
Is that an offer for something?
That doesn't take two hands.
Oh, it's an actual
touch
dormouse.
mine too.
I thought that, is that a dormouse or a rabbit? It looks like a bunny. Are you sure?
Nope, they're little
Rabbits
mice.
have longer ears than that. Have you seen a rabbit?
They're mices.
Well, it's some sort of rodent, I could tell.
It's okay. Her
I also
rabbit's
thought it was-
pink and mine's purple.
Well, that's because yours is abused.
And mine is pure? Yes, that's
yeah.
how that is.
I'm referring to your dormouse as your vajayjay.
I know. That's why I'm looking at you.
That's
Does
why,
that make it worse?
Yes.
That's why her mouth is agape, and she is just blatantly staring at
If
you.
her mouth was gape, her dormouse wouldn't be abused.
I don't
This
want
is
to be your
fun.
friend
This
anymore.
is fun. Let's keep going.
This
Remember-
is the general audience episode. You can't talk to me like
Don't
this.
remind me of the. You got to tell me ahead of time.
I thought you understood this
I
is part 2.
did.
This is part
You're
2.
So this is
Forcing
the
these
time
floral
where
drinks down my
I
throat.
interrupt you and tell everyone that if you just tuned in to listen and have not listened to part 1 of Charnell's fantastic storytelling regarding the Michigan murders, also known as the co-ed murders, also known as the Ypsilanti Ripper. I think I got all 3 of them.
Yep.
You need to go back an episode because you don't want to start here.
No, don't start here. Just go back one episode if you're new here and listen to that one first so that you know where we're at, because I'm not going to give a recap. I'm really just going to dive right in.
That's how I
to
like
more
it.
murder and
Sometimes
mayhem.
you just need it fast. Give it to me.
So where I like how, hold on, let me contradict myself
Right.
immediately.
Yeah. You tee one up and softball it to me, but I can't say anything because now I'm a jerk. For the general public.
She's cleansing the air.
Here we go.
He was very
Squeak.
angry.
Squeak the golf duck. You've got it out. You good? All right. We're going to woo-saw our way into part 2. And I will tell you that where we left last time is just that John Collins has been arrested. Okay, so now we've got to put together a profile for him. The defense has to put together their defense, prosecution, everything they've got him on, right? So in trying to decipher the personality traits of a homicidal predator, many things are taken into consideration, including victim background, time and place of the murders, method of abandon, murder weapon use, degree of planning, and evidence of overkill. A relatively recent development in the profiling field, and I don't know if this is necessarily still recent, is the analysis of a suspect's geographic patterns that in the victim selection area.
It's not new now. It was new at the time.
But it was new. That is what I meant. I wrote that wrong for what I really meant in that at that time in the 60s.
Is it still 69 when he got arrested?
Yep.
This is a beautiful example, though, of what has turned into forensic social work, where they are doing that profiling on a really advanced level. And so you're talking about the geographic piece, which is super important in this case because we're talking about that, need to go back to certain places. But there's lots of other things that you can profile people with now that gives you more leads than we've ever been able to find before.
When I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
When was his first victim, Mary? When was she found? Like what year?
68.
Okay.
Yep.
This is all within, their bodies are being all found within like an 18-month time frame.
Yeah, because Mary was the first one in summer of 68, and then it would be almost a year before the second one is found.
But in the middle of that, there was a vacation to California.
There was. And
a victim.
Yep. It took them a bit to get a task force and connect all of these bodies that they had found. Yep.
Does it ever go through all the police departments? You said 6, and so I'm counting in my head, and I'm like, okay, so we have Michigan State Police.
We do.
We have Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office.
Yes.
We have the Ypsilanti PD.
Ypsilanti.
We have Saline.
Ann Arbor.
I'm sure they pulled Ann Arbor PD.
And then I'm missing the 6.
There wasn't like an outside state agency like the FBI
gets involved.
There you go.
Okay.
Your federal agency.
Yeah.
Thank you. I forget about the feds.
But at this time, what is relatively new is looking at, because this is very relevant, the geographic patterns here. The geographic patterns of where the victims were from and then where they were left as well. The travel route for body disposal, where and how the bodies are disposed, the degree of isolation of the dump site. It tells something about the suspect's mobility, their method of transportation, potential areas of where they live, and the ability to traverse, barriers like crossing state lines or in this point, county lines.
And for the people who aren't familiar with Michigan, Southern Michigan has a lot more abandoned farms than you would think.
Yeah.
Like
there's plenty of.
We're talking about this like it is much
Jason,
more abundant than you would imagine.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up because when I meet people from out of state and I tell them I'm from Michigan, they immediately think of Detroit.
Right.
Detroit is huge and it's fun and I love going there. 90% of Michigan is rural.
It's all farm.
And it's beautiful. We're talking, we have everything from mountains to farmlands, lakes, rolling valleys, hills, beaches. We have more beaches, coastline, right than Florida.
Yeah.
Yes.
I believe. And so people don't think about that. They think metro.
But
we're not metro.
You can literally throw a rock and hit an abandoned farm.
100%. And in the meantime, you probably
60s.
hit 4 cows.
Right.
And
and this, I can only imagine they were still
Ypsilanti
there,
was not as built up then. They were still there. Yeah, there was still clearly a downtown. It was obviously a college town.
Yeah.
Some people now it's damn near a suburb of Detroit because you come out far from to Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor that they're all
it's a mini Detroit at this point. But in the 60s, I'm guessing it wasn't
pretty. Yeah, it was a college town. So and this case is kind of near and dear to my heart because this all was happening in the early 60s or in late 60s. My uncle went to Eastern to wrestle. Mm-hmm. So he was there within, 8 years after that happened.
Yeah.
So
familiarity is part of one's comfort zone, and many murderers begin their crime spree in areas where they live with victims with whom they feel relatively safe. In the case of the co-eds, it was likely and proved to be the case that the murderer lived near Eastern Michigan University campus. John Collins, in fact, resided in Ypsilanti, a few blocks from campus, and went to school there. In this case, there were many geographic similarities. Several victims lived near the EMU campus and disappeared from there. Many were students, which indicated that he prowled the campuses. 6 of the 7 bodies were found in rural areas between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. The 5 body dump sites formed a tight circle. Only Jane Mixer's body was found outside the area, which some thought eliminated her as John Collins' victim. But given the overwhelming evidence of his involvement in the case in California, there is no reason to believe that he would only use the Ann Arbor-Ypsilanti border as a dump site. The 5 dump sites close together indicated that he traveled his way back and forth and knew the area well. In fact, One obvious murder site, an abandoned farmhouse, showed evidence of at least 2 victims having been killed there and possibly more. The killer left most of the bodies out in the open, in Lover's Lane type areas, where they would be discovered fairly easily, except for Mary, who lay in the weeds for a month before discovery. However, John Collins returned and apparently moved her around as if to make discovery easier, or she was moved by animals. That fact remains unclear.
There were lots of bite marks.
Mm-hmm. She was dumped 150 feet from a road. Joan's shell appeared to have been stored in some kind of root cellar, perhaps the farm site, before being dumped 12 feet from a road and covered with grass. After that, John Collins made no effort, as if he wanted these bodies to be found.
I agree. Mm-hmm. I think he wanted them to be found. It was part of it because he wanted to come back and visit. He wanted to be part of the investigation.
100%.
He showed up at the funeral home, you guys.
Yep.
Like, this guy needs attention.
We know that the murderer has some kind of car to transport the bodies, and he also crossed state lines because Roxy Phillips was found in some weeds dumped in a canyon near Carmel, California.
And now we have the feds, for sure.
Up near Salinas. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong.
I've heard it's
there.
Salinas.
And Salinas and Salinas. I know.
Oh, that's the California town?
Yeah, that's
Isn't that kind of weird? That Salinas and
Saline.
Oh, and Saline. That's a good point.
know.
Yeah, because
wonder if he did that on purpose.
We do have Saline. He was staying in Salinas,
Right.
where, in California when that happened. He had cruised the area the day before, making himself familiar with it and engaging girls in conversation before making his move on Roxy. Thus, he was organized and calculating, preferring to grab victims where he was comfortable and dumping them in wooded areas away from where he killed them. Often, they were left in ways that made discovery easy, and he apparently killed more than one in the same place. Now, aside from the typical suspicions about boyfriends and acquaintances, there was a peculiar connection with the case of the Boston Strangler that perhaps could have merited more attention than it was given, considering the source. Now, the police command post was flooded with hundreds of tips and a few false confessions during all of this happening, okay, which they see pretty commonly. They received a call after the 4th murder that alerted them to an interesting lead. The front page of the Ann Arbor News had run a photo of a group of people forming a rent strike protest against owners of off-campus housing, and a leader of that group was named who had been one of the principal suspects in the Boston murders. Ultimately, the Boston murderers were pinned on Albert DeSalvo, a former Harvard student. This man was in his mid-20s, was now a graduate student at the University of Michigan with an IQ between the 155-170 range, so that's exceptional. He also had a history of drug abuse, petty crime, and mental illness, and he had been a patient at Bridgewater State Hospital where Albert DeSalvo had been examined, the Boston Strangler. He was diagnosed as psychotic. He claimed he was Othello and showed other signs of schizophrenia. Initially, he'd been arrested for abusing his pregnant wife, who claimed to be afraid of him. He said he once had tried to strangle her. He had been without a father for the first 3 years of his life, and he'd been raised by women. Friends said that he was subject of wild fits of violence and intense anger, and he claimed that he would save the world by destroying its women. The person who noticed his picture was none other than the psychiatrist who had examined him, Dr. Ames Robbie. He was now the director at the State Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Ypsilanti, and he had formerly been the director at Bridgewater. So when this man was at Bridgewater, this doctor treated him, and then recognized him in a photo on the front page of the Ann Arbor News when they were covering people protesting this off-campus housing, okay? So Dr. Ames is like, Roby, or Robbie, it's R-O-B-E-Y, I don't know, Roby probably. He is like, hey, this guy's in Ann Arbor, and he's psychotic, and we have the Ypsilanti Ripper going around. So he's like, listen, I examined both the Boston Strangler and this man, whose name was Gerald Frank, and so, Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped a page. His name is not Gerald Frank. My bad. He had examined both DeSalvo and this young man named in Gerald Frank's book, The Boston Strangler, as David Parker. Okay, so Roby did not believe that Albert DeSalvo was the right man, and in fact, DeSalvo was never tried for the murders themselves, but he had strangely suspected that David Parker was, to the point of alienating police by his insistence that they had the wrong man. He thought 2 of the recent victims showed the signature of the Boston Strangler murderers, like stockings tied around their necks. And Roby had also recalled that David Parker had once tied his shoe with a knot that was characteristic of the Strangler's method. So he contacted the police with his suspicions and the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti murderers, but since they had noticed no unusual knot in the choking garments of these victims, they discounted the connection. They also determined that David Parker had not been in the area when the first and second murders were committed. However, they did think that Dr. Roby's knowledge about both sets of crimes was significant and that he had been around when Mary had been killed. He had been appointed in July of 1967. So for a moment, the police started to suspect Dr. Ames Roby himself as a suspect.
Son of a bitch. Can you imagine?
Right?
Yeah.
How many of us out there, like Charnell, we probably could have made ourselves suspects at multiple times in some cases, right? You have to be careful.
Just from your sheer following of a case and having information
Yeah.
about it. There is a Netflix movie coming out I just read about this morning with
Well, first of all, I've seen Dexter. Okay.
Oh, it's not Netflix. It's not Netflix. I'm sorry. It's actually Amazon Prime, but it's about 2 true crime podcasters who are trying to help solve the same crime, and they accidentally put themselves into the investigation and become suspects. Yes, and it's going to be hilarious. I think it's Ryan Reynolds even. I don't know.
Oh,
look it up.
Well, I want to see that. And also, if you're a podcaster, don't fucking do that.
No, please don't do that.
We
Look it
tend
up
to
and tell me
cover-
who it is, because I think it's Bateman and
Are you kidding me?
it's some of my
And
fav-
Ryan Reynolds? If it's Bateman and Reynolds, I'm going to watch it.
It's some of my favorite actors.
With
I was
baby
just
oil.
reading about it this morning. And baby oil. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
But this is essentially what happens to Dr. Ames is he's like, wait a second. I was at Bridgewater and I treated this David Parker and the guy implicated for the Boston Strangler cases. And this guy's in Ipsy. It could be him. And they're like,
Talk about a
wait
guy who's
minute.
never going to want to cooperate with investigations again now.
Right?
Good job, guys.
No kidding. Because this Parker's like, you think I'm the Boston Strangler. Now you think I'm the Ipsy Ripper. Like, what is going on? I can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I'm just going to stick with these hamsters in the lab.
Yes. Poor guy. Anyway, let's talk a little bit more about this psychic stuff. When it appeared that the police, despite their resources, were getting nowhere with their investigations, the citizens group called the Psychedelic Rangers decided to act. The entire community, I mentioned them in part 1, that there was a citizens group that came forward.
But
right?
you didn't tell me they were the Psychedelic Rangers, and it's the 60s, and all I can picture is flowered, tight bell-bottom pants and midriffs and hippie beads and
People smoking pot and on ecstasy.
and
Yes.
picket signs.
Yep. The entire community was beginning to see that some supernatural force behind the string of murders, although it wasn't clear whether it was God's divine plan or the devil at work. One mother was convinced that her daughter was set to her fate to save others. A few amateur astrologers stepped in, but no one had an answer. At that time, Peter Hurkos, I mentioned him in part 1,
Yes.
was one of the most famous psychics in the world. In 1941, at the age of 30, he fell off a ladder in the Netherlands while painting a house and survived a 4-story plunge.
And then he started seeing things.
Yeah, suddenly he found he had psychic powers.
Weird.
I know.
It's also known as a fucking aneurysm. Like, come
Head
on,
trauma,
man.
Sure, head trauma. Especially the ability to read a person by being in close proximity or touching an object associated with that person. Okay.
Well, reading people I can buy. Maybe even his head injury opened himself up to being more intuitive about
Yes.
how things feel.
Yeah. Yes.
And some of us are just good at that. Well, you've said it before. I know how to read a room.
Yeah, well, you read the energy,
Right?
You may not know exactly the science behind what you're doing, but I will say this from a spiritual perspective. There are a lot of times where people experience a traumatic act, and it does change the chemistry in their brain in that their egoic brain is no longer controlling them as much as it used to.
Fair.
And they are open to more experiences that they weren't before.
And this is the same type of advice that you might give a woman who makes bad decisions in men, to follow a different kind of a feeling than the feeling that they are currently following.
Correct.
So, okay. All right.
Changing the energy of it all.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. He visited the United States in 1956 under the sponsorship of a research society and decided to remain. He became a regular celebrity. Among his accomplishments, by 1969, he listed his successes solving 27 murders in 17 countries. He had, yes, that's the one. What is it? Who is it?
You're right. It's Jason Bateman, Ryan Reynolds. It's called Dead Wrong.
You guys,
I'm not sure when it's coming out sometime this
in
year.
May.
I'm gonna need to watch
that. They don't sponsor us, but we
with popcorn
with lots of butter.
I'm gonna need my husband to work
with your
overtime
dormouse
that night.
I'm gonna need my husband to do overtime.
Those two are two of my favorite human beings and actors ever, because they're both just so ridiculously themselves.
And they did a movie about us. They're true crime podcasters.
And they're us. Well, first of all, we should hang. We should send them a congratulations and ask them if they want a day in the life.
For sure.
If you want a day in the life
of a true crime podcaster.
Ryan Reynolds, I'd be happy to.
You wouldn't be able to contain yourself.
Right.
With you.
Yeah, you just do that and stare.
Are
and
you
drool.
kidding me? I would not fangirl. They should fangirl. I am me.
She'd never
we
shut
are
up.
famous.
I'm pretty sure they sort through their fan mail pretty selectively.
I don't send mail.
Just nude.
They should know who I am. To them, I would.
For sure. I'd be about the only people.
I'm going to have to go back about 30 years to find an acceptable one. But other than that.
Okay. So this guy, he's pretty successful. He's helped solve 27 murders in 17 countries, and he offered his assistance in the Boston Strangler case, which had shown his powers to have potential. He did identify a shoe salesman as the multiple murderer, but police determined that this person was not who they really sought. Then, when DeSalvo confessed, Hercos insisted that he was not the man and that the suspect was still at large. Investigators ignored him, although the public perception was that he was instrumental in keeping the case remaining intact. Archie Allen led the psychedelic rangers into negotiations for Hercos' services. The psychic had requested $2,500. Remember, we were talking earlier about
I knew there was compensation.
but it wasn't the police that were compensating him. It's these it's the psychedelic rangers.
The psychedelic mushrooms.
Yeah. They offered him $2,500 plus traveling expenses, so the group sent out a plea for money. They received only a few donations, which amounted to $1,010.
There will never be a time like the late 60s, early 70s.
Now, Hercos was initially insulted, but then agreed to come for the cost of his travel, perhaps because it was a high-profile case.
Weird, I might get attention from this. I am so sorry. I am going to be so pessimistically skeptical through all of this part because I don't love it.
I know.
Not this. We've had psychic cases where I am in. I'm in, my toes are dug in, and but I'm I buy it and I get it, and now I don't like any of this. It makes me feel icky.
It reminds me of the scene in Elf where where they're trying to negotiate with what is that?
Peter
Dinklage?
Yes.
Before or after he runs across the table and attacks Will Ferrell?
Before.
Oh, okay.
And they initially, he tells them what his terms are, and they kind of get him down on it, and he's like, no, that's insulting. Then he's like, I'll be there at 7. Make sure the internal temperature of the car, whatever. This is how he's like, I'm $2,500. And they're like, well, the best we can do is 10. And he's like, I'm insulted, but I'll
be
take
there
it.
at 7.
Right. Mm-hmm. And because they're thinking hey, he's got a newly revived career here in the States now all of a sudden, so he probably did it because it was high profile. So he arrived July 21st, 1969. His method was to hold pictures of the murder scenes in closed envelopes, reciting reconstructions of the murders in remarkable detail. In a book about him, the author claims that he went to the grave of a victim and then went off into the woods and pinpointed the murder sites and how the victims were found. Several officers commented later that he had turned them into believers, particularly the one who was accurately told that he had a gas leak in his camper. However, many of the facts had already been published in newspaper. A clever person could have boned up all of that. In fact, on July 14, a reporter from the Detroit Free Press came to California, where Herkos lived, with photos of the victims, a map of the area, and some articles of clothing that had belonged to the victims. And so that might have cued him in. And see, and this is what I don't like. Like, true mediumship, I don't like people that make a circus act out of it and are just trying to profit out of it, because it gives a bad reputation for those that are legitimately trying to help others and have actual
I agree.
skills.
I try to be open-minded about these things, but I'm kind of trained to see things in black and white with a little bit of gray. But that's it rubs me wrong thing, and I just have to treat it as what it is. Yeah. We've had medium cases where they're very accurate, and sometimes what happens in those cases, and I think the reason I like them, is you get somebody call in who like literally wants no compensation. They're like, "Listen, I had this vision. I saw some shit. This is bothering me in my dream. I think it applies to your case. Here it is."
Right.
Even though you might get a lot of crazies, you might get a lot of people calling like that. To me, that's far more legitimate. Bringing somebody in like him is really no different than bringing in a social worker, a psychologist, an investigator like you guys, who are really in tuned to humans and your spiritual self. So you could take you into a situation like that, even before you were doing any of your current soul work, and be like, oh yeah, this is my gut feeling. This is how I feel about this person. We all have done that. We go off our gut all the time.
Yep. Now, Herkos insisted that he could solve the case within the next day or two, only to then recant. He gave them a name, but it was just one more suspect to investigate. He said the killer was a genius who'd been playing with the police. He also called him a sick homosexual, a transvestite, a member of a blood cult, a daytime salesman, and someone who hung around garbage dumps.
No, I agree with zero of those things. None of those fit a profile. No. Where did he get none of those? He wasn't even doing a good job making something up that doesn't fit the profile of what's happening.
No, not at all. He said the killer was about 5'7", blonde and baby-faced, 25 to 26 years old, and about 136 to 146 pounds. He drove a motorbike and went to school at night. He was also associated in some way with a trailer. Herkos also thought the murder count would reach 19. It was now a battle between larger-than-life adversaries, the killer and Herkos, and he assured the public that, as a representative of the good, he would triumph. I tell you all of this because this really was a big part of the case.
Are we winning?
No one's winning here. But truly, those who were alive at this time and like following this was a major part of this case. And so that's why I included it. I don't always include when people reach out to psychics.
If I was the detective on this case, I would have become an alcoholic. I would be drinking every fucking day after work going, are you kidding me that we have to listen to this moron come up with this profile when it doesn't fit anything? Was anything accurate about his profile, Charnell?
I'm getting to it. So 2 days after arriving, Herkos received a call warning him to leave or be responsible for another murderer.
Murder.
My bad. Murder. There is some evidence.
Yeah, you're going to be responsible for a new murderer because I'm going to kill you because you're pissing me off.
There is some evidence, too, that John Norman Collins actually went to a restaurant where Herkos was showcasing his abilities so that he could eavesdrop. He told friends that Herkos was a fraud. Okay? So later, after John is arrested...
John, I agree with you.
Well, after John's arrested and they interview his friends and whatnot, they say he clearly went to one of those spots after Herkos arrived in town, and he told me that he was a fraud. Because so he's more than he's the one that called him and said, you better knock it off.
He wants to be involved in the investigation like a normal serial killer does. He was going to stalk this
Absolutely.
And watch him and see what he was doing.
Yep.
His physical description, he is not blonde. He is not fair.
No.
I think he's much taller than 5'7", too, from what I've seen. He does drive a motorbike, but weirdly, there was already an allegation that there was a motorbike with one of the victims. He's actually a kind of, I'm going to say this, tall, dark, and handsome.
Yeah. He is, and he was charming. I mean, with his personality,
he's a nice-looking guy.
Herkos then received a note that sent him on a wild goose chase and raised everyone's hopes, but indicated only that someone possibly the killer was taunting him, Herkos. On July 27th, Herkos went on television and predicted that an arrest was imminent. He hoped the killer was listening because he was going to describe him. Now he changed the description to a man who was 6 feet tall and had dark brown hair.
Well, this fits better.
Yep. However, Collins was not watching. He was picking up his next victim on a motorcycle. Her disappearance put pressure on Herkos to deliver. However, a photo of her gave off no vibrations, although he believed that something bad had happened to her. He predicted that her body would be found by a roadway named Riverview or River Drive. And in fact, it was found several days later in a ditch alongside Huron River Drive. That was about 1 mile from where Herkos was staying, as if it was a challenge. And this did happen right after he received that phone call that you better back off or you're going to be responsible for another murder.
So let me get this straight. He publicly indicated where this would happen, leaving a clue so that the person who was murdering could be like, okay. And then he left the body in the place that ended in River.
She was already missing. No, she was already, they showed him a picture of a person who was missing.
Okay.
And so he was like, listen.
Was he ever a person of interest?
Yeah, he should be.
No. Because he had media around him. Like, he was there for the attention. So where he was at all times was well documented.
Why did he change his mind on the description?
Don't know. Maybe after talking to John on the phone when John called and warned him to back off, he got different vibrations. Upon hearing of the body's discovery, Herkos hit his face and said her face was beat. It was wrinkled like a monkey face. He described the disposal site accurately, but still could not name the killer. When taken to the site, he didn't experience much in the way of vibrations, but said the man that he saw was not an American and that he was associated in some way with a ladder. That was all that he could see through a vision. One account holds that a girl came to Herkos Hotel at 1:30 a.m. One night when he was in town and in the presence of 3 police officers. She said that she felt her boyfriend fit the description because he had given the description of the tall, over 6 foot, dark hair. She hesitated.
It doesn't limit the population.
Right. She hesitated to give much information, but finally said that his name was John Collins and he rode a motorcycle. However, there is no indication that the investigation of John was prompted by such a report, although it could explain the dramatic change in Herkos' description of the killer.
Right. Her boyfriend, he had already been arrested at this point, right?
No, not while the psychic stuff is happening.
He has already been brought in for questioning at this point.
Several times.
So she knows he's a person of interest, and then he just described him, and then she goes and talks to the psychic and says, hey, this person who randomly already has happened to have been brought in to be interviewed by law enforcement who did the hard work here. Yep. I'm so sorry. I just can't. I can't wrap my head around this one and be okay with it.
I know. I'm not wanting you to. This dude's a fraud. Yeah.
I know you're presenting me with neutral information from your part.
I'm presenting you with what the public at the time was reading about in the media when all of this is going down and how it's convoluting things. Most certainly making this more complicated than it needed to be. A book about Herkos' feat claimed that he also led police to the wig shop where the last victim was seen getting on a motorcycle, but there was no mention of this by the police or newspaper. In fact, it was the missing girl's roommate, not Herkos, who had alerted police to the fact that she had gone to pick up one of her wigs.
It was called Joanne's Wigs, by the way. You can go and look at the picture.
The next day after the body's discovery, Herkos left the city, vowing to come back a week later to wrap up the investigation. Before he could return, though, John Collins was arrested.
Okay.
So, John Norman Collins, I haven't told you anything about this guy.
I'm ready.
Honestly, is that the first time you said his middle name?
Yeah. No, I think I said it in part 1.
No, you said in the part 1.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Maybe I heard you say it at the beginning, but in my head, I could only think of someone named Norm.
Oh. Norm. Yeah.
Well, she did say his name in the first episode.
Then it was planted somewhere. Okay.
Yeah, it was
John Norman Collins was a 22-year-old student at Eastern Michigan University, majoring in education when he was arrested for the murder of Karen Sue Beineman. He was from Center Line, a suburb north of Detroit, where he had lived with his mother and stepfather. At 6 feet, he was wiry. You want to know what's funny, though?
I saw him
In
with
my
a leather
notes,
jacket, so he didn't look wiry to me. He looked a little bit, actually, he almost looked stocky to me.
He was wiry and muscular.
Oh, that's okay.
That's the description.
Yeah,
with neatly trimmed dark brown hair and
Yes.
sideburns. Many people thought him handsome and
Yeah.
easy to talk to. He had a part-time clerical job at EMU's McKinney Union, and he shared a house near the campus with another man. He had belonged to a fraternity, but he'd been kicked out under suspicion of theft. He had also engaged in petty burglaries for fun and kept his 4 motorcycles running with stolen parts. One of his professors suspected him of cheating quite often. He also got involved in grand theft when he wrote a bad check for a camper trailer to take to California in June of 1969. He never returned the trailer, and the name on the check he wrote was lifted from a student whose wallet and ID he had stolen the week before. John Collins' family life was unstable, having been abandoned by his father after his birth in Windsor, Ontario, on June 17th, 1947. Remember, Herkos did say that he was not American, and he wasn't. He was born in Canada.
That's 1 year to the date of my father's birthday.
Yeah, 1947. His mother's second marriage lasted only a year, and his her third husband, was an abusive alcoholic. So she divorced him when John was 9. Although John Collins took the man's last name. That's how he ends up John Collins. In high school at St. Clemens in Center Line, he was an honors student and an athlete, lettering in 3 sports. He dated regularly, was president of the C Club for Letterman, star pitcher for the baseball team, and a tri-captain of the football team. Those who knew him called him polite, quiet, respectful, and nice. However, one former girlfriend said that he was mad most of the time. Okay. He began attending Eastern Michigan in 1966 after a year at Central Michigan because he wanted to major in education so that he could teach the upper elementary grades. While there, he became vice president of the ski club, played sports, and was in the Theta Chi fraternity until he was asked to leave because of the
Theft?
the thefting. Thereafter, he became more of a loner, preferring to ride his motorcycle over dating girls. No, he preferred murdering over dating girls.
Yeah, they didn't see him dating because his dating was post-coital or post-murder.
Yep. His teacher said he was a quick, alert student, but noted that his grades had actually declined by the second half of his sophomore year. He should have graduated in 1969, but was 24 credits short and had made no attempt to make them up over the summer, so he seemed in no hurry to get out of school. Of course not.
Well, yeah,
That's where he's picking off his victims.
your victim pool's there.
Yep. When he went out, he was often sexually aggressive, and he made a few remarks that provided potential motives for some of the killings. One former girlfriend remembered a time when John Collins had walked her across campus and then begged to fondle her. Suddenly, he held her away and angrily asked if she was having her period. Mm-hmm. She admitted that she was, and he yelled at her. "That is really disgusting," he said, and then he stalked off. Remember, one victim was not sexually assaulted because she was on her period.
Why does he think menstruation's disgusting?
That's a psychological situation.
Well, I know some guys do, but I find that interesting.
Mm-hmm. Another
What?
co-ed.
Nothing. I have comments, but this is the general public.
Yeah, you just wait. You keep your
When I stop
you keep
recording,
your mouth
you
shut
can
when you
tell
talk to me.
You keep
He's talking at me with his eyes.
She
right
just
now.
told you
I'm
you
like-
keep your mouth shut
Well,
when you
and
talk to
I'm
me.
just staring at her, hoping she knows what's going through my head.
I do.
But I want to know what finally triggered him to start killing. I mean, I'm guessing he blames his mother for something because of all the abusive relationships she had, and he didn't have a father. It was probably her. She blames her. It's her fault daddy left, and then she brings in the assholes that abuse him.
Because women ruin the world.
And he's a violent psychopath who likes to see people suffer.
The way he did.
It's not always nurture, right? It's not always her mom's fault the way he was raised. Because somebody
in high school, apparently he was quite a nice kid.
He maybe, but although always angry.
A lot of a lot of sociopaths are.
Right.
They know what role to play in that moment.
Or bear
And
class clown like Dahmer.
if we're assuming Mary was his first victim,
that's all we got, but
Right.
we don't know for
Right.
certain.
But what
Well, we know his geographics are important.
Mm-hmm.
and his methodology kind of changed as far as leaving them random places and not covering up as much as he wanted to or did previously, I guess.
Yeah, I'd want to know.
Wanting bodies to be found, so he's not hiding them as well.
I would also be interested in knowing the psychology behind his first kill.
Right.
Like when he crossed the line and which one was truly his first kill.
I want to know what pushed him over the edge. It was like, I'm going to go murder someone.
Would you
tonight.
like me to continue telling
Yes.
you about him?
We would.
Or do you want to
Please.
sit there and
Look at each other.
theorize all of it and leave me out of the conversation?
Can I say both?
Yeah,
Bit of
right.
both.
Oh, I don't want to leave you out of the conversation.
Little bit of both. Well, I've got the information right in front of us.
All the questions we just asked?
Not all of them, but let's listen.
Fantastic. I feel
It's
like I'm
almost
on
like
a
she was
podcast.
prepared for this.
I know. Okay.
Another co-ed recalled riding with him near some wooded area, and then when they stopped to rest under a tree, he asked her, and this is on his motorcycle, okay? He asked her if she would be scared if he was the co-ed killer. She could be the next victim, he said, being there alone with him. She thought he was kidding, but the serious expression on her face made her uneasy. He's toying with people, right? He wants to gauge their reaction. A girl who said she had met a man that looked like John Collins when he accosted her from his car remembered him saying that he couldn't stand girls with pierced ears because they left holes that defile their bodies. He's got some actual...
He is slashing their bodies apart when he's killing them, slashing them.
He also told a tale of having strangled a cat with a length of clothesline to make his point. He put his hands on the girl's throat, scaring her. Okay, he did not murder this one. John Collins also had expressed some ideologies that bordered on, psychopathy. He had told a girl that if a man had to kill, he killed. If he decided it was right for him to do it, then he had to do it. The perfect crime, he told her, was when there was no guilt. Without guilt, a person could not get caught. He had said something similar in an English paper. This is a quote from his English paper. If a person wants something, he alone is the deciding factor of whether or not to take it, regardless of what society thinks may be right or wrong. If a person holds a gun on someone, it's up to him to decide whether to take the other's life or not. The point is, it's not society's judgment that's important, but the individual's own choice of will and intellect. End quote. Collins believed that he could get away with murder just in the virtue of the fact that he had decided it was the right thing for him to do. If in fact he killed all of the victims or only one, each exhibited a degree of overkill that indicated how angry he was with women, possibly his own mother, toward whom he displayed a fair amount of coldness, whether his rage was spurred by pierced ears or thwarted advances, like he did not like to be told no at all, evidence of a menstrual period, or any other quirk. He was clearly an organized killer with a sexual rage that was beyond his control. I mean, I think he could control it, but yes. So let's talk about the trial and what happens after his arrest. A search of John Collins' room failed to turn up any further evidence except for what Arnold Davis was able to tell them about that box from when the campus security guard decided to take things in his own hand and investigate Collins. He also revealed that John Collins was a thief who ran his 4 motorcycles off stolen parts, and one of the bikes he had recently been stolen. He'd been committing burglaries with a former roommate, Andrew Miguel, and burglaries are quite often the precursor to sexual crimes. Did anybody know that? Because quite frankly, sexual crime is a burglary in itself as well.
Yeah.
In that you are stealing someone's integrity and what are the other words that I'm looking for here in that depraved?
I did not know that, but it makes sense because I'm guessing burglars.
A burglar.
A
home invader.
Thank you. And then sexual assault would become a crime of opportunity.
Yeah. Yes.
Someone's sleeping in their bed while you break into their house.
And taking things without their will.
Right.
Without their consent. Yep. Miguel had just gone with Collins to California at the end of June. And it was soon learned that the 17-year-old girl named Roxy Ann Phillips had vanished in California after a friend who had walked away from her house had met a man cruising around named John from Michigan. Collins and Manuel had been staying in a rented camper trailer, which they had stolen and left in the backyard of Miguel's grandfather, who lived in Salinas. So Roxy Phillips was strangled and battered and discovered July 13 in a ravine near Carmel. Manuel, who had left Ypsi hastily when Collins was being questioned, was found in Arizona, but he denied knowing anything about the murder. He was charged with theft because of the camper trailer, but during the trial, he was not pressed much about his background, which was probably due to the defense wishing to downplay Collins' association with him. They don't want to bring in that it could be somebody else, right? Like they're trying to get Collins for this. Collins' trial began June 30th, 1970 in Washtenaw County before Judge John Conlin. A lot of Johns.
And
Collins and Conlin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. The witness selection took nearly 2 weeks. The prosecutor, William F. Delhay, focused only on the murder of Karen Sue Benneman, for which there was the most physical evidence. The defense lawyer was Joseph Louisel from nearby Detroit. John Collins' mother originally had hired a lawyer named Richard Ryan, but Ryan had begun having doubts after his client had asked for an off-the-record polygraph test. So, no. Collins agreed to it, and Ryan refused to disclose what it had revealed, a good indication that he was not pleased by the results. He suggested a change in Collins' defense to diminished capacity plea, like that you're psychotic, right? You've got diminished capacity.
I have not got the vibe from that at all.
Not
in
at all.
This case.
No. So John Collins' mother was outraged and fired him on the spot, replacing him with the more expensive and canny Joseph Louisel. And he has a partner, Neil Fink. Okay, so they're going to represent him. Fink outlined the prosecution's strategy as this: establishing that the accused had been cruising in Ypsilanti on the afternoon of July 23rd, that he had been positively identified by witnesses as riding off with Karen between 12:30 and 1, that her time of death was established at no later than 3 that afternoon, and that trace evidence had confirmed that Karen had been in the basement of the Leak home. Remember his uncle, who he was house sitting for while who's a corporal police officer who was on vacation, to which only the accused had access. So, meaning John. The defense strategy was to attempt to get evidence and testimony thrown out and establish an alibi for Collins for that afternoon. Evidence was heard stating that on July 20th, there was little rebuttal of John Collins out cruising that day. Like, everyone agrees. Yes, he was out cruising on his motorcycle between 11:30 and 12:30. 7 young women had been approached by him on his motorcycle. 7.
Oh, okay. He was trying to find the perfect victim.
Yep.
And now we have some witnesses, some people coming forward saying they had some type of contact.
On July 20th, yes. The time of death was also resistant, to be challenged. Key witnesses were the wig shop owner, an employee from the chocolate house, and the office supply house where there was a girl that was interviewed, all of whom had identified John Collins as the man who had picked up Karen the day she disappeared. Arnold Davis, the roommate, also testified about the box that he had seen John Collins removing from his room, and that John had pressured him to give an alibi that he knew to be false. A former girlfriend spoke about the motorcycles that John owned. The defense challenged several witnesses on eyesight and memory, but failed to make a dent in their respective testimonies. The one problem the prosecution faced was evidence of police harassment and manipulation of witnesses, but still they proved credible. In all, 57 witnesses were called for 17 days of testimony in this case.
Yes.
So let's talk about the verdict.
Okay.
It was the physical evidence that ultimately got him. Public health employee Curtis Flunker had matched the type A blood found in the basement of his uncle, where he was house sitting, to the same blood type taken from Karen. Although he had failed to do more sophisticated testing of subtyping, Walter Holtz, a chemist, testified that the hairs found in Karen's panties were identical to those found on the floor of the basement. The defense claimed that the precise identification of hair is impossible, and in any event, she could have picked up such hairs elsewhere. There were experts for both sides on what was called neutron activation analysis and the chemical properties of hair, but it's unlikely that the jury followed any of that testimony. One expert who was roundly challenged claimed to have formulated that only 4 to 8 people in the state of Michigan would have been intelligent enough to and been able
Why
to
are you
have
laughing?
their hair sample to essentially understand this hair sampling that they were saying. He had just come up with his formulation in the previous 2 weeks before he testified, and it had not been scientifically verified. But here he is testifying about how he knows these hairs match.
Where'd they find him?
I don't know. None of the defense's
Michigan State.
Right?
Listen, I'm going to agree with that as a Michigan fan. I'm just cracking up at you.
Oh, hell.
None of the defense's alibi witnesses were able to offer a definitive time frame for John Collins' whereabouts on the afternoon of July 23rd. However, their own fiber expert insisted that hair analysis on such minute samples could not be done with any degree of certainty. And in fact, if the hair in the victim's panties were from the basement floor, why was there no other debris mixed in? And there was in the sample collected by the lab from the floor itself. To top it off, this expert had collected hair shaved from the thighs of his female assistants and found that they matched the hair from the panties as well. Okay,
so that's just the hair finally.
Yeah, just like, hey, I just so you know, you're matching this conclusively, saying that there's only so many people that are going to have this type of hair, but I just shaved my secretary's thighs. Questionable tactics,
that's
my friend.
Cringy.
It's 1970, so you know how that goes. Hey, Nancy.
Shag carpet was in so many ways.
Right. Nancy, I see that little pencil skirt. I'm going to need you to donate some hair from your thighs.
Who has hair on their thighs?
I don't know. Not me. I can't grow any there. No.
On your thighs?
I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Men grow hair on their thighs.
Right. The prosecution's rebuttal proved that there was indeed debris from the basement on the panties as well, and that the defense's witness had used a different processing method, which yielded an inaccurate reading. So they're going back and forth about this hair for a long time, which is why they believe that the jury really didn't follow it to begin with, okay? Because there's a lot of rebuttals on the hair testimony. So what the prosecutor really wanted was to get Collins on the stand and reveal what was beneath his choir boy face.
But he would have to choose to take the stand.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it was his attorney going to... He wants to, but I bet it was against the advice of counsel.
A girl he tried to seduce at his uncle's house that weekend before Karen was murdered testified to his amoral philosophy and sexual hang-ups, his nearly nude photo in Tomorrow Man's magazine, and his history of thievery. Apparently, he submitted a nearly nude photo to Tomorrow's Man magazine, and it was published at some point in time.
Nearly nude at that time frame was probably him in swim trunks.
The
really short polyester ones at the time, and they were kind of low rise with him on his motorcycle. Huh?
Those are nice ones.
I agree. I think that was a time frame where they were very attractive.
Now, but
it was nudity.
The defense team was uncertain about letting him testify, but Fink, the partner that was helping in the defense.
Oh, he also does appeals. I know this attorney.
He wanted to risk it.
Yeah.
He felt the jury would wonder why John Collins was not willing to proclaim his innocence, and that could go against him. Now, Collins was willing to do it, but proved that he could not stand up to Fink's prosecutorial role-playing He had bursts of angers, and it alarmed the attorneys.
So basically, when his attorney played prosecutor and practiced with him, he freaked out on his own fucking attorney during practice.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is why we don't have you testify. And he has an absolute right not to testify and to have that jury instruction. So the attorney thinking, well, it's not going to look good. Well, no, it's not going to look good, but it's his right.
It is. They decided to ask the judge to allow John Collins to confer with his mother in private, and she would decide whether he could take the stand
with his
in
mommy?
his own defense.
He's like 25 years old.
I think it's clear he's got mommy issues. He's 23, but yes.
All of a sudden, the Norman Bates and Norman is coming out.
Right?
They were together in the judge's chambers for nearly half an hour, and when the door opened, Loretta Collins came out, her face puffy from weeping. She groped her way to the corridor wearing a stunned expression that told the lawyers that she had learned something that she had not expected.
Yeah, he told her.
John Collins followed her out, eyes red, when the judge asked the defense if they had any more witnesses. Lewis Sells said no.
Okay.
So both sides rested.
Yeah.
In closing arguments, they both appealed to common sense, each using the concept to contradict the other side. Later, over drinks, Lewis L. admitted that he believed the jury would return a verdict against his client.
Oh, yeah, that's hard. You know that when you're going in. That was a no-brainer.
Yep. On August 19th, 1970, after deliberating for 3 days, the jury brought in a unanimous verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, John Collins denied ever knowing Karen Benneman and claimed that he was innocent of her murder. Now remember, they lived close to each other, right? He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment at Southern Michigan State Prison, a minimum of 20 years. He went through 3 appeals and even changed his name to Chapman to get a transfer to Canada, where he had been eligible for parole in 1985, where he would have been. He also tried to escape by tunneling out of the prison. The state of California declined to extradite him for the trial in the murder of Roxy Phillips, feeling by 1972 that the case did not warrant priority attention, although they had delivered a grand jury indictment against him at the time of the investigation.
I can't believe he only got 20 years.
Well, think about this. The murders of the other 6 girls actually officially remain unsolved because they only prosecuted him for the crime of Karen.
Oh. Maybe they'll still charge.
Collins was implicated superficially in 15 murders, but only the first 7 on the list are officially considered his, as outlined in the Michigan murders. Number 8 and 9 are very likely his. Characteristic of his murders were strangulation, beating around the head, and the dehumanization. Articles of clothing missing, nude or semi-nude bodies, evidence of sexual assault, disappearance without a struggle, and disposal of bodies to ensure discovery. Most of the girls had long brown hair and pierced ears, and several were having their periods at the time.
People v. Collins is a really important Michigan law case. So this is, I'm just going to give you all kinds of legal stuff now because you brought this case up. It was the first time, at least real publicly, that you had an issue with potentially seating an unbiased jury. So Fink filed some appeals, and I pulled the Justia case up.
It took 2 weeks for them to seat a jury, Megan.
Yes. So, but I want you to know the question that was submitted on appeal, and it was important because this really cemented some decisions about changes of venue. He said he was denied due process of law by reason of the denial of request for change of venue. They tried multiple times to change venue. So when the attorney made that statement about how he knew his client was going to be convicted, some people look at that and say, yeah, because you know your client's guilty. Well, maybe, but he did not think and truly believe, to the point that he appealed this conviction after, that his client was ever going to get a fair trial. And it talks about basically that there was clearly going to be substantial publicity and extensive media publicity during the time that these were happened. And they talk about his indictment. 5 motions for change of venue were filed. On the 3rd of the motions, they actually held an evidentiary hearing. This was on April 20th of 1970. A psychologist that they had retained, the defense had retained, based on a survey of the public. It was his opinion that there was but a slim chance of an unbiased jury being obtained in Washtenaw County. The judge did something interesting, and this is the reason that this made some case law. he reserved the ruling on the motion till such a time as an effort was made to secure a jury. So when jury selection started on June 2nd, there was a fourth motion made for change of venue. Voir dire went from June 2nd through July 9th. That's over 2 weeks. That is a month of voir dire to seat a jury. The fifth motion for change of venue was actually finally denied on June 29th of 1970. At that time, there were 14 members of the jury finally seated, and the defense had 3 peremptory challenges remaining. That's important because peremptory challenges you don't have to give cause for. They chose not to use those. So they clearly believe at this point, in my opinion, it shows that they believe they've seated a jury that's appropriate. So then it was not taken up on appeal. There was a lot of opinion making at that point in time. But this case, which is probably one of the most famous ones in that time frame to be around, set some pretty interesting common law case law in the state of Michigan.
It did. And I haven't said this yet, but there's actually an updated image of him. He's still incarcerated.
Yeah, he hasn't made parole.
He has not. No,
he was eligible. No. My guess is he had life in prison, but he was a possibility of parole after 20 years, and he hasn't regained it.
That's correct. That is correct. And I realized as you were talking that I hadn't made that clear.
Thank you. Because there was a moment of panic. Is this guy out?
No, he is not. And honestly, I hate to say this, but he's even aging well in prison.
Yeah, he was the pictures of him when he was perpetrating the crimes. He is a nice looking guy.
Yeah, it's. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, he looks a little scary in that picture, but he's clearly not happy. It's a mugshot. Yeah. Who looks good in their mugshots? He's
probably not in a good mood.
No,
but yeah, he's still, still incarcerated in the state of Michigan. They just updated his mugshot last year.
Really disappointed that he was only convicted of one.
I know. I know. I mean, I think a lot of people really.
There's an advent in DNA, and there's literally no statute of limitations on murder. He could be charged at any time. Just food for thought.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at this point in time, they just feel he's already in there for life, and so the cost to the taxpayers would not outweigh.
I think but he's coming up to parole boards, right? He's still coming up for parole.
And
after
I do want to
55.
Yeah, it was 1970. He was convicted
55
in
55 years
1970.
of being imprisoned that he hasn't
paroled.
No, that he hasn't bragged to someone about the people he's killed.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he has.
Maintaining
I
his
did want to
innocence.
go over his victims one more time before we end.
Let's speak
since
their names.
We went this two episodes long here. Mary that we know of. These are the ones that we know of connections with him. Mary Flezar, Joan Schell, Jane Mixer, Marilyn Skelton, Dawn Bassam, Alice Colomb, Karen Beneman, Roxy Phillips, Eileen Adams. We didn't talk about her yet. She was 13 as well, much like our other 13-year-old Dawn Bassam. And she was of Toledo, Ohio. She was kidnapped in December 1967 and found in January south of Ypsilanti, raped and strangled with an electrical cord and stuffed into a sack. Like another victim, her bra was tied around her neck, she was cruelly beaten with a hammer, and a 3-inch nail was driven into her skull. Her stockings were arranged on her body, but her shoes were missing. There was evidence of sexual assault, and her body was placed in plain sight. It appeared that she had left willingly with the murderer. So it fits all of the other, parts of the MO for him. And we just had not talked about her yet. And so that one is also connected. Also, that's 1967. Mary, remember, was first found in July 9th, 1967. Oh, and I think that I have to retract because I think we said the first one was 68. And that's that. It was 67. And then Joan was 1968.
Okay.
So, because there was a year between Mary and Joan.
What was his obsession with shoes?
Listen,
I haven't.
I know, but you haven't murdered 7 people over
for
them.
sure.
Yeah.
I also want to throw out there a major source that I used for this was a document written by a Katherine Ramsland called John Norman Collins, the co-ed killer. And so all the stuff is linked, but I like to give shout out when I use someone as a major source. So that's the co-ed murders. Thank you, Kyle and Sarah,
thanks,
for
Kyle.
this.
I'll sleep
Honestly, yeah, we probably could have done a 3-parter on this. There's so much more info.
When you look up his name, there's something that was out like a year ago about a documentary being released. Like
There is a documentary.
there is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can pull it up. And
Like
he's
recent one?
I don't know if it's recent, but there's definitely a documentary. There've been a number of books. You know where he's in prison right now, right? He's at Robert Cotton?
Yeah.
Right up in Jackson.
Jackson.
That's when I
Yeah.
kind of shot you a look when she said in prison in southern Michigan. I was like, is he in Jackson?
Yeah, he's in Jackson.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Well, that's how the person that recommended this, they work in the prison world.
Oh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's where we got the suggestion from.
I have
but yeah.
a relative
Oh.
that retired from there.
So do I. But we definitely could have, I mean, for certain, there's documentaries out there if you want more. We don't often do 3-parters because I feel like people get burnt out on listening about the same person. But so I like to keep them to 2 parts. But yeah, there is the gist of it. So
I'm glad we covered it.
yeah, yes, me too. Thanks again for the suggestion. Are you guys ready for a brain bath?
Yeah, bathe us.
Okay, this one is now Jason.
Oh God, are you warning him now?
General
Jason.
public.
I'm telling him he can't do this. This is no reason to call into work, my friend. If you need to take a sick day or a
Wasn't sure
vacation
what direction
day,
this was going in.
I know. Hey, I'm taking a sick or vacation day. Do not do what this person did.
Yeah.
Okay? February 2021, police in Coolidge, Arizona found a 19-year-old man bound and gagged near a water tower. The man, Brandon Souls, told them that 2 men had knocked him unconscious outside his house and dumped him at the tower. He claimed the motive for the attack was a large sum of money his father had hidden in multiple locations around the town, like a little national treasure.
He was watching Goonies before this.
However, security footage in front of the Souls house revealed that no such abduction took place, and investigators found no other evidence of a kidnapping or an assault.
This dumb shit tied himself up to the water tower.
There was also no money to be found either. Souls had fabricated the crime to get out of work. He was fired and charged with making a false police report.
Just fucking calling sick, you
Right?
dumbass.
Like what? At what point?
Just make up the flu. I'm shitting my brains out on the pot.
I have the man
Don't
flu.
do this.
Yeah.
Right.
I started my man period.
Which
Right.
means my nose is
Anything.
running.
Anything is better than
My ovaries are
faking
sore.
an
Like,
abduction.
come on, man.
Please call in one day
False
that your
report of a-
ovaries are sore.
I will.
False report of a felony is a felony.
Yes. I have.
Is it?
Yes.
Yes.
False report of a misdemeanor is a misdemeanor.
Oh, interesting.
It's weird how it.
Good to know.
Right.
You're welcome.
I mean,
Don't falsely report them.
Don't
Not that
do
I'm
that.
gonna,
Like, don't
but-
lie.
if I'm gonna, it's only going to be a misdemeanor.
To
Right.
continue our brain bath, though, I have a little quiz for you.
Oh,
Which
do we do it? Wait,
I
do we
think
win a
you're going
prize?
to get it right.
Are we taking turns? Do we buzz in? How's this work?
you're
What are
getting
the
very
parameters?
Competitive right now.
First person to say the right answer
Okay.
will win a drink from Megan because she brought them today for the next episode we're going to record.
There's only 2 left.
Yeah.
It was an uneven number.
Oh,
we might have to
goodness.
get into your stash.
Yep. Garage
Garage beer.
friends
The
beers. Yep.
random garage beers that get left here.
Yep. All right, here we go. Which is the most common stolen food in the world? And I think you guys are going to know this.
Bread.
Well, let me give you the options.
Oh,
It's multiple choice. I think I know, though.
Slow down.
I think I know.
Chocolate, wine, seafood, cheese, baby formula.
Cheese. Ooh, baby formula. Cheese. Cheese. Going with my
baby
guy.
formula.
You are right. It is cheese.
Was it cheese?
You're right. Your first
Okay.
instinct was the right one. Yes.
I should have
it's
stuck
cheese.
with it. Bread and cheese
me tell
makes
you.
sense.
An estimated 4% of all cheese produced is in a given year is stolen. Recently, high-yield cheese heists include $7 million worth of Parmesan and an estimated 14,000 wheels, by the way.
That's a lot of stolen cheese.
Yeah.
What do you do with that
It's
much
in
cheese?
an
Eat
operation.
it, Jason. Sell it on the black market to
That
restaurants.
much cheese.
This happened from an operation that ran in Italy from 2014 to
The great cheese
2016. Yeah. And $50,000 of mozzarella stolen between 2017 and 2019 by
And
2
that's-
thieves in California.
I feel like we should cover that.
That's not going to last.
Can we do an
You got to
episode on
eat
that?
the mozzarella.
You gotta eat the mozzarella.
That's a soft cheese.
So, get on to research. Do you want to research a case and bring us one, my friend?
Will you do
cheese
the cheese
heist
bandits, the
would
cheese
be-
heist?
That would be the best. Jason, you should. Oh, yes. Okay. Look at us birthing things right here during our
Jason's
brain
going to
bath.
birth a wheel of cheese.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Oh, good God.
Okay, with that, thank you all so much for listening. We hope that you,
Keep it curious.
Keep listening.
until next time,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.